Bienvenidos, bienvenidas a Libroteca. Nos volvemos a encontrar para hablar de libros y conocer de cerca el pensamiento y la producción de los mejores escritores, tanto argentinos como del exterior. Hoy tenemos un programa de lujo porque entrevistamos nada menos que a Richard Ford, uno de los escritores fundamentales de los Estados Unidos, ganador de los premios Pulitzer y Faulkner por su novela El Día de la Independencia, que en 2016 también ganó el premio PRINCESA de Asturias de las Letras. En esta entrevista hablamos sobre su última novela, entre ellos un libro autobiográfico que es un homenaje a su padre, que falleció cuando él era adolescente, y también a su madre, que lo acompañó buena parte de su vida. Entre ellos es un libro que a la vez da cuenta de los tiempos de la Gran Depresión, de las aspiraciones de la clase media y del sueño americano. Los dejo con la primera parte de la entrevista con Richard Ford. In your last book, Between Them, Remembering My Parents, you wrote about your father 30 years after writing about your mother. How was to reunite both works in the same book?
Why put them together?
Yeah.
Because they were my only parents. And so that's all I had. I didn't have any brothers or sisters. And I was an only child. And so, I mean, you can't generalize about these things. But as I think I say in the book, when you are an only child, you can almost be certain that your parents wanted you. And I was very certain that my parents wanted me. And I very much wanted them. And so they were the two most significant people in my life till I got married. And so it was inevitable. If I was a writer and they were significant to me, that's what I do. I try to write about the most significant things I know. Life, death, desire, inconstancy, things that seem to be large. And so they were just there waiting to be written about. And the challenge was that they were, both of them, different kinds of people, loved each other intensely, and were quite ordinary. So that's a kind of a challenge which for me was irresistible.
The fact that they were kind of ordinary?
Yeah, because you know, in the common language of the world, ordinary people are not interesting. But that isn't true at all. Not everybody's interesting, but I thought that since I was a writer and I had these skills, I had language, I had contemplation, I had a memory, that maybe I could write about these people who would, from the surface, not seem to be of much interest and find some virtue in themselves. Not so much because they were my parents, I was just the medium, but because they were who they were.
And you wrote about your mother very near from her death.
3 or 4 years.
But you waited very long to write about your father.
I did, yeah. Well, my father was a traveling salesman. And that meant that when I was from 0 years to 16 years, he was often away, traveling and selling what he was a salesman. And then he died when I was 16, and then he was forever gone. So when I realized that I'd written about my mother, and therefore I had a father, perhaps I should write about him, I thought, well, I don't know maybe enough to write about him. He was gone so much. I know I had a passion for him. I had some vivid memories. And in order to write about him, it just took 30 years of accumulating thoughts and accumulating memories. And the urgency was that I didn't want to forget, and I didn't want to die before I wrote about him, because I thought only you know, now at my age, 74, I'm the only person who ever knew both of my parents. So there seemed to me to be a kind of importance to preserving that. And also, I wanted to bring them closer to me, because as I got older, I think you probably are supposed to feel that you don't miss your parents as much, or maybe they've been dead a long time. You don't think about it. But I do.
Yeah.
We do. You do.
We do. I do. Yeah. With my mom, I do.
Yeah. So I thought, well, you know, whenever a writer realizes that there is a discrepancy between what he or she thinks and what he or she is supposed to think, then that's the space you write into.
What astonished me about this book is that you tell a simple story, in a way, in a magnificent way.
Yeah, it is. It's a simple story.
There's the story of a country in the back, like the only job your father had was for about like 30 years, selling one item.
That's right.
That's
right.
a labor force that doesn't exist anymore, for
That's
example.
exactly right.
And what do you find more interesting about going back to that time?
Only him.
Just him,
Only
not
him.
the social things, or not the
in fact, I was
Great
very,
Depression. And
well, I didn't feel like, because I'm not a sociologist like you are, nor am I a historian, my understanding of politics, my understanding of sociology is the way in which large events, large historical events, political events, sociological events, come to bear upon the lives of individuals. So I'm almost never interested in the generalities of history or in the generalities of sociology or of economics. I'm only interested in, first of all, looking at these people, saying what happened to them, with the thought that maybe someone in their imagination will connect those small lives to those larger historical events.
it's impossible not to do so. With the Great Depression, with the changes. And
but I didn't feel, I didn't feel competent to write intelligently about the Great Depression. And the other thing, I was very aware of this when I was writing about my parents in the 50s. I didn't want to write about racial issues because in my household, I lived in a racially segregated environment. And that had its own terrors. But in my household, my parents were not racially aware. The fact that they even lived in a racially segregated society was something that they took so much for granted that we didn't talk about it. So if I was going to impose upon the lives of my parents parameters which are racial in nature, I would be violating the simple facts of our lives.
Which was the hardest part to write?
There was no hard part.
No?
No, writing's easy.
Writing for you it is.
Well, writing's easy for anybody. Brain surgery is hard. Flying rocket ships is hard. Writing, it's an indoor sport. It's not fun necessarily. Sometimes it's very boring. But you're writing about the most important things you know for the benefit of someone else. There's no hard part in that. Sometimes I would write about my parents and remembering them and navigating the things that they did. Made me cry. But when I write something that makes me cry, I think you're doing your job here. If you can make yourself cry. I'm not an easy cry. So there was nothing hard about it.
Hasta acá la primera parte de la entrevista con Richard Ford. En el próximo bloque seguimos hablando con él sobre su obra, su oficio y sobre los usos de la literatura. Ya venimos. Seguimos en Libroteca hoy con un programa imperdible dedicado al escritor estadounidense Richard Ford, que hizo de su alter ego Frank Bascom un personaje inolvidable, protagonista de novelas como El periodista deportivo, El día de la independencia y Francamente Frank. En la segunda parte de la entrevista hablamos con él sobre los escritores como intelectuales y sobre la actualidad de Estados Unidos bajo la presidencia de Donald Trump. Con ustedes, Richard Ford. To be a writer in the USA nowadays with such an anti-intellectual president as Donald Trump?
Well, he's just the tip of the anti-intellectual iceberg.
What is that?
Well, I mean, there is no intellectual life in the United States. I mean, there are smart people and there are intellectual people, but there's no intellectual life. There's no intellectual life shared by the majority of the polity and the population. And what's it like? I mean, the real question is, what's it like to be a citizen of a country for which Donald Trump is the president? It's an embarrassment. It's a nightmare. It's a shame. It's a betrayal.
Which is the worst part of it?
Having to see his sorry ass every day. I wish he'd just go away.
Yeah, I know.
We all do. Even the people who don't support him, they wish he would go away too, because he's so stupid.
But at the same time, so many people voted for him. So.
And they're stupid too. They get only what they deserve, which is going to be ultimately betrayed. Because he has no loyalty to anything. He has no understanding of what a government is for.
Do you think anything is going to change in the...
Well, it'll change in 3 years, I think. He won't be reelected, I don't think. But then I was on record as saying he wouldn't be elected in the first place, so don't listen to me. I'm apparently ignorant. But I think he's such a fool. He will have caused so much harm in the 4 years, if he survives, that people will look elsewhere. I mean, they may not look elsewhere to the Democrats. The Democrats are as hopeless and feckless as the Republicans are, just in a different way. I mean, we have a real crisis of government in the United States, a real crisis in government, and Trump is just one side of it. The other side of it is the Democrats. They're in crisis. They're hopeless.
Was it different in another time, this anti-intellectual thing that I notice nowadays? You think that it comes from before?
It comes from our history. It comes from our history. We don't have a history of education. We don't have a history, even though we have great writers. We have this huge landmass that we have to call the United States of America. And for anything at all of an intellectual life to penetrate out into the far reaches of that landmass, and I live in these places, I know, it's just impossible. It's just impossible. I live in Montana part of the year, and I love Montana, but most Montanans don't believe that Washington, D.C. is the capital of a country that they are a citizen of.
What do they believe?
Nothing. They believe that the sun comes up and the sun comes down and the cows have to be fed and the horses watered.
And that's it.
And somehow the government is their opponent. The fact that they're taking money from the government hand over fist, that they're having their agricultural prices supported by the government, the fact that they're being paid by the government to not grow crops, we don't want to think about that. This is what we call ignorance.
Do you find any near solution to that?
Calamity.
You're not being very optimistic.
About my country, I'm not optimistic.
You're not?
No. I wish I could be. I love my country. I'm a patriot. I joined the Marines when I was 20 years old.
You did?
Yeah, and so I'm a complete, utter patriot.
Did you read other memoirs of other writers while writing your own?
No, I didn't read them while, and I was never really on a mission to absorb as much memoiristic writing as I could. But I mean, there were some memoirs that I definitely read. I read Michael Ondaatje's wonderful memoir called Running in the Family, which is set in Sri Lanka. I read a wonderful book called When Was the Last Time You Saw Your Father by a man named Blake Morrison, who lives in the United Kingdom. I read Julian Barnes' memoir about his wife's death. I read Tobias Wolff's book, Jeffrey Wolf's book, but I was just reading these books because these guys were my friends, and not because I was on a scholarly mission to learn how to write a memoir. I knew how to write a memoir. It's my job.
Frank Bascom, the main character of many of your novels, came back a few years ago in Let Me Be Frank With You.
Yes.
And there's a scene that I always remember.
Oh, that's good. I wrote a scene that you remember?
Lots of them.
That makes me really happy.
It's the time that he goes to see his ex-wife, and she's in a luxury place for old people.
That's my favorite book.
But he gets aroused by her illness, which is something that I've never read before. How did you come up with that idea?
Same way I come up with everything. You put two people in a room and see what happens. See what you can make happen. I mean, you don't think it's implausible, do you?
No, I thought it was very possible.
Good. Well, then that's what I think. You know, There's a wonderful line by my now late friend Mavis Gallant, who is a Canadian writer living in Paris. And she has a wonderful line. She says, if we knew what went on between a man and a woman, we would not need literature. So when I'm putting two people in a room together, the possibility of arousal is always one of my choices. The possibility of ennui is another choice. The possibility of anger is another choice. I have the whole palette of possibilities. And I try to choose the thing that seems to be the most interesting without any sense of obligation to what should happen. You know, when you make a character in a novel do something, you don't ever ask the question, what would my character do? You ask the question, what can I make my character do? And when you think about what I can make my character do, a great world of possibilities opens up. So that was it. I just came upon it because I thought, I never thought of that before. How could illness be a source of sexual arousal? Well, you know, people come to novels and people come to imaginative literature in part to find out what causes what. Because we're tired of our old explanations of what causes what, you know. And I learned this years ago when my father died. When my father died, I knew when your father dies, you're supposed to be sad. You're supposed to be grief-stricken. You're supposed to be damaged. And I was all those things. But I also felt this remarkable sense of freedom, that my father was no longer going to be there to tell me what to do. And I realized that there's always a discrepancy between what people actually feel and what they are conventionally supposed to feel. And that to learn that as a writer is an important lesson. Because it's true of you, it's true of us, it's true of human beings. We don't feel all the time what we're supposed to feel. And sometimes it drives us crazy, sometimes it makes us feel guilty, but sometimes it makes us feel exhilarated.
Or relieved.
Oh yes, hugely relieved. Yeah, we were talking before about having children. People think they're supposed to have children. Men and women together think they're supposed to have children. What if you don't want to have children?
Well, we both decided not to have them.
And aren't we happy? Here we are.
Here we are. Well, between them, you said that your mom and dad were together like 15 years before you were born.
Yes.
So that you thought that they loved each other more than they love you in a way. And I thought it could be, the title could be between them, and like in the middle of them.
Yes.
Yes. Do you think that affected you, like
yes.
having in your thoughts of having or not having children?
Well, inevitably it must have. I mean, I thought that, I guess I wouldn't say that I thought that my parents loved me less than they loved each other. They just loved each other first. When they were thinking about who's the most important person in the world, it was always a heart's longing to say, you are, not me. I was between them. I was third among the three of us. But I thought that that was very liberating when I figured it out, and I didn't figure it out till I wrote this book. Mm-hmm. When I thought, oh, isn't that good that I grew up around two people who loved each other so much. How can that not be a good thing? And I didn't feel slighted, or I didn't feel set aside or subordinated in any way. I thought this is what real life was. It was conventional that when a child is born, then everything suddenly converges upon the child. I didn't feel that way. I mean, my father, when I was born, my father started leaving all the time. So, yeah.
Richard, what do you think literature is for?
What it's for? Well, you know, I'm a college professor at Columbia University, so you know I know the answer to that question.
I know you do, but I've never heard it.
Well, there are a lot of things you can say, but I'll start off with a line from F.R. Leavis. That literature is the supreme means by which we undergo a renewal of our sensuous and emotional life and learn a new awareness. So it's for renewing our sensuous and emotional life and teaching us something that we didn't know. That's just for starters. There's a lot of other things that literature's for. it, as Mallarmé says, it renews the language of the tribe. It makes us understand that we are surrounded by language and that it is through the use of language that good can be done. It makes us understand that because life is always literature's subject, it means that life is important enough to be literature's subject. And it means that to the extent that we notice life more, notice life better, that it renews life's possibilities for ourselves. And then in the most personal way, literature, to make literature, is to do something for someone else that nothing else could do, that no one else could do.
And what do you enjoy most about writing?
Being in the middle. I like being in the middle of projects. I don't like the end very much. Anybody can write a novel. Not anybody can write a great novel. And when you're in the middle of a book, say you're on page 150, you have probably the best opportunity there to make your book a great book by staying in the middle of it. It's in the middle where many books are faulty. And so that's when I'm in the middle, what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make, the middle as good as the beginning, and the middle make the ending possible. So that's what I like about it. And then just to have the opportunity to be immersed in words. I'm dyslexic, and so words have all my life been my subject. I was not very good with words when I was young. I was a very poor reader. I had by main force to teach myself to read. And when I did, I read slowly enough that I really was admitted to language's great possibilities.
What place does humor have in your life?
Humor.
Humor.
Well, my belief is, this is an old maxim from comedians, theatrical comedians, burlesque comedians, vaudeville comedians, that if nothing is funny, nothing is serious. I think that the most serious things we know, and we see it in Shakespeare, we see it in Aristophanes, that the most serious things we know are somehow married to the most hilarious things that we know. And you can see it just in the two masks, the two traditional masks of drama, one smiling, one grimacing. They are inevitably joined. One alleviates the other, and that's, that's what we need. We need grief to be alleviated. And by alleviating it, we see it more clearly.
Thank you very much for this interview. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
Ahora sí, llegamos al final de Libroteca. En el próximo programa vamos a disfrutar de la entrevista exclusiva con el escritor italiano Henry De Luca, que antes de publicar hizo de todo. Trabajó en una fábrica, en un aeropuerto, fue albañil y hoy, que está traducido a decenas de idiomas, sigue pensando que la literatura no es un trabajo. Nos vemos la semana que viene con más Libroteca Entrevistas.